Hello and welcome to Yew Dell Botanical Gardens virtual volunteer orientation. We are super glad to have you on board with us, and I can't wait to work with you all. My name is Amanda Allred. I am the volunteer and website coordinator here at Yew Dell Botanical Gardens, and I'm going to walk you through some of what to expect as you come on to our team as a volunteer. So, the first thing you need to know is our mission statement. As a nonprofit, everything that we do here is determined by our mission, and our mission helps to make all decisions about new programming and initiatives that we take on. Our mission is to spark a passion for plants and gardening through accessible science and inspiring beauty. And I think that's such a powerful statement there. Um, Passion and accessibility and science and inspiring people and just being in nature. And I think you'll really start to see that common thread throughout everything that we do here at Yew Dell. So, an abridged history of the property, it was purchased in the 40s by the Klein family, Theodore and Martha Lee Klein. You see them there in the middle on the right picking apples. And they lived on the property, they raised their family here, they built a lot of the structures that you see. So the castle, the house, anything with that old European style architecture was most likely built by the Klein family. They also ran a very successful nursery business from this property. They primarily grew yews or taxus and hollies. And they kind of came into power at the perfect time because this was kind of the late 40s, early 50s. Families were settling down after the war, building homes, and it was the thing to do to line your property with a hedge. And well, it just so happens that yews and hollies make perfect hedge crops. So they did very, very well. Theodore also liked to experiment with what he could get to grow in Kentucky. He had the arboretum you see today at Yew Dell. It's about 8 acres. Many, many, many of those trees were planted by Theodore as well. So you can see some of the experimentation and the love that he had for plants and in the community there. Theodore and Martha Lee lived until the late 90s, and when they passed, the property sat for a few years. The family didn't really want to take on the responsibility of the farm, and it was just kind of getting overgrown. You'll hear more about that here in a little bit. But some community members did not want to see this property lost, so they got together, they raised money, and depending on who you ask, there's so many, the way I heard it, stories. The day that they raised enough money and signed the paperwork was the same day there were bulldozers out front ready to knock everything to the ground to turn it into whatever you want to say, warehouses, a church parking lot. I've heard all sorts of different things. So just in the nick of time, they swooped in, saved the property, and it became Yew Dell Botanical Gardens. And in 2022, we celebrated our 20th anniversary, and it's only growing from there. So our team is made up of several different buckets. Many of them overlap. One of them that I don't think I have a slide for are our donors. As a nonprofit, we do rely on donations as well as income from our events to be able to fulfill our mission. Our memberships also support that. We do not require that volunteers become members, but we do encourage it. If you travel at all and like to see gardens, we're part of the American Horticultural Society's Reciprocal Garden Network, which means that if you travel and go to another city that's in that network, you can actually get into their organization for free, which is amazing. It pays for itself in like one trip. We also have members only perks. So our very popular summer concert series, Bourbon and Botanicals, you can see there in that bottom right photo. We actually open that up. Series tickets are available to members a week earlier than to the public. There's also discounts on classes and all sorts of other things, including getting to come and visit this property for free year round. We also have our very important team of volunteers, and it's made up of so many different subsets of people. We have some Klein family members that are still involved, which I think is really beautiful. Some of the grandchildren and children who grew up on this property and have the most magical stories to tell. That photo on the left is one that I just adore. It's from the early 2000s. They are removing vines from the castle, and all three of those women today are still involved. One is a volunteer who adopts a garden, another is one of the grandchildren. She's actually in the top right photo as well. And then the third is our founding board president. And as of today, she is still on our board of directors. And I just think that that really speaks to the power of the community that surrounds Yew Dell. Not saying you're stuck with us for the next 20 plus years, but if you do, that's it's part of the community. You are in the family once you join the volunteer program. But all sorts of other things. We have people who say, I have a black thumb, I kill everything I touch. Well, there's still an opportunity for you. There are crafting opportunities and events and tours that can be led, and so much more. And then we have our staff. All volunteers do fall under the volunteer and website coordinator role. But when you are here working, there are different teams that you would work with. So we have our horticulture and facilities team. These are people who work in the gardens, the nursery, the woodlands, and a very occasional curation project. We're still working on building that up to where we can support a curation program. But if you work with any of those, you'll be working with our horticulture and facility staff, our events and programming. That could be big events, it could be checking in people. For cultural pass, it could be greeting people and sharing about our memberships. It could be leading tours as a docent. Lots of different things fall under our events team. And then we do have some limited administrative opportunities available. So depending on which kind of opportunity you're working with, you'd be working with a variety of folks inside our admin offices. And then speaking of volunteer opportunities, um, our most regular volunteer opportunities are the ones that you're seeing on the screen here. So our volunteer season is typically about March through November, depending on the year and what kind of projects we are tackling. And we usually have our weekly work days on Wednesdays and Thursdays. That's typically in the mornings. Saturdays, we have a second Saturday workday every month, which is really cool because orientation is not required for that. So if you have a friend who's interested in just seeing if they want to get involved at Yew Dell, that's a really great opportunity. Or if you want to volunteer with your family, um, we have lots of families that come out on those Saturday workdays to volunteer together as well. And then we have our garden adoption program. You may hear that referred to as GAP. These are individuals who work in a specific garden every single week. So they pick, say, Thursday morning, they come out and work in their specific garden. And it's really cool because they get to see that garden go through the entire season. This is something where if you want a little bit more flexibility with your schedule and want to see a specific area grow and change throughout the seasons. Each garden that's part of that program has different kind of learning objectives. So we have a rain garden or our evaluation gardens or shade areas. So they all kind of have a different vibe to them to meet your interest. To be eligible for the garden adoption program, you do have to attend 5 work days. That lets you get to know the grounds and the staff and the gardens, and it also allows us to get to know you so that when you do express interest in that, we can sit down with you to find a garden that would work for you and get you on the schedule for your chosen day. Our nursery volunteer opportunities are a lot more limited. There's not as much for volunteers to do back there at this point in time. We do have a small crew who works out there on a weekly basis. And we do have a nursery reserve volunteers list. These are folks we have on a list who have said, I'm really interested in the nursery. Let me know when anything comes up. Usually when we have a really big project come in the nursery, those are the folks that we reach out to first to help us get that project accomplished. But when spots do open, the requirements are similar to the GAP program, at least 5 work days on your calendar that you've come out to, and then we can discuss the potential of adding you if there's any space there. We do allow youth volunteers down to the age of 6. So you can see the age regulations there. So 6 to 13 need to be alongside a guardian. We usually have like a 1 to 5 ratio, so 1 adult to 5 children. And then youth ages 14 to 17 can work alone. There, if there's a waiver signed by their legal guardian, there are some exclusions. So our evening events, Yuletide, for example, which is our holiday event, it's in the evening, so we do require that they sign up in pairs for that. But generally, they can volunteer without an adult. Other volunteer opportunities, I've mentioned a few of these throughout this so far. We have our tour guide program. So they lead tours for groups that come in. There's also a wandering docent program. So they come and just kind of meander through the gardens and share some of the history, point out cool plants, help people find their way around and things like that. Special events, Fairy Day, Yew Dell, which is our Halloween event, and several others that'll pop up, like our plant sale. That's a big one that we have a lot of volunteers help with. We have decor prep days. This is where we are gathering material from the gardens and drying and crafting with it, drying them and crafting with them to create decorations for our holiday events. So Boodle and Yuletide. Um, these are very popular, and so we've actually expanded those to start in March each year, and they'll go through about November as well. These are really fun because this not only inspires the volunteers that work it to grow things and use them beyond just being pretty in the garden, but visitors come and see these decorations and get inspired and they say, "Whoa, I have those things in my garden. I didn't know I could do that with a hydrangea." And it just really, it's our mission in action. We do also have a fairy forest. All of those houses are made and lent by volunteers. They are also maintained by our Fairy Forest Committee. So if you're feeling crafty, that might be an area to ask about. Our photography program is primarily geared towards capturing the human elements of the garden. So think of like the kid with their face shoved in a flower, or a couple having a picnic, or a couple on a hike. Just people in the gardens enjoying being in nature. That is the primary focus of our photography program. And then we do have, like I said, some limited administrative work. If that or anything else on here is something that you are interested in, reach out to us. We'll get you on a list so that when those opportunities do present themselves, we can reach out to you first. And then there's always new opportunities popping up that we can't predict right now. So just keep your ear to the ground with our communications, which we'll talk about here in a minute. Now, to prepare for your shift, closed-toed shoes are required for every single volunteer shift. So please make sure you're wearing those. That is a safety concern. We have been known to exclude people from volunteering, and I hate that. But we want you to leave with all the toes you came with, is what I like to say. Wear clothes you can get dirty. You're more than likely going to be playing in the dirt. And then anything that you need to be able to volunteer or to work outside comfortably. So sunscreen, bug spray, hat, um, gardening sleeves, whatever you need to function safely. Please make sure you bring those. We also strongly encourage bringing a water bottle. Hydration is extremely, extremely important. If you need a snack, you can bring a snack. If you have your favorite set of hand tools you want to bring, please bring those. The only thing is we can't have any powered tools. And any tools you bring, we really recommend labeling them with your name and make sure they go home with you, because if not, and they don't match our tools, it's very possible that they will go missing. We also recommend bringing your own garden gloves, but we do have gloves that we provide for volunteers. There will never be a job that we have you come out to work where we do not have the tools for you here. So don't stress about that. As long as you show up, you have your water bottle, closed-toed shoes, we're ready to go. Um, and then if there's anything else, we'll send that out in an email for you. One note about the gloves that we do have at Yew Dell is they may contain latex, so if you have any kind of latex allergy or sensitivity, it may be worth bringing your own gloves. What to expect when you arrive. So all volunteer shifts with very, very, very few exceptions, you will be parking in the front parking lot. If that is different, it'll be in the email that is sent to you beforehand. So you'll park in the front lot. If the visitor center is open, you will enter through the visitor center. If not, we'll watch a video here in a second that shows you how to get in through the gate next to it. It's worth noting though that that gate is locked when the visitor center is open. So we'll watch that video here in a minute. The lay of the land has changed a little bit, but the general direction of where you go has not changed. So then you'll head to the Horticulture Center, which the video will show us how to get there. And that's where you will sign in. It's where you'll meet your staff, get your tools, find out what you're doing for the day. It's also where you will get your badge or your vest, which we'll talk about in a second. You'll get your tools, and then you will travel with the team member to wherever you'll be working. You'll do the task for the day. At the end, we try to save time to clean the tools before we return them. That's done a lot to help our tools last a lot longer. And then you sign out, and it's the end of the day. We do ask that you or encourage that you ask questions and have fun the whole time. If we ever ask you to do something that's just the bane of your existence and it's going to prevent you from ever coming back to Yew Dell ever again, if we ask you to do it, please tell us. We don't want that to be the experience. We want this to be as beneficial to you as it is to Yew Dell. And we typically have some other opportunities laid out if that's the case. So please don't hesitate to speak up if there's anything that's crossing a limitation of yours or that you just really loathe doing. Okay, so if the visitor center, which is the big red tobacco barn out front, is not open, this video is how you will get into the property and the path you'll take to get to the horticulture center, which again is where all of your shifts are going to start. So another thing that's changed since we made that video is we no longer sign in on paper. In order to sign up even for this orientation, you had to go through Volunteer Matrix, which is our online volunteer management system. So there's now an iPad down in that same area. It's at the left end of that same table that you'll use to clock in. And there should always be a staff member in there, especially for your first shift, and they can help you get clocked in once you get there. It's pretty easy. And again, if you get lost, just look for people, volunteers and stuff. They're all friendly and are happy to point you in that direction, or you can refer back to this video, which will also be, there will be a link that goes out with every shift you sign up for that has a page with a lot of the information we're talking about today, including that video if you need a refresher. So, representing Yew Dell, as a volunteer at Yew Dell, you are representing the organization. And we have all sorts of different people on our grounds, from visitors to other volunteers to staff members, board members, donors, contractors. Even if we're closed to the public and it's a rainy, drizzly day, we still have people um, walking around. We want to make sure that we are best representing the organization, which means that when you're working at Yew Dell, we ask that you have one of the following things on visibly. I love this picture because this day all of the volunteers came with the same volunteer shirt on, which was a lot of fun. But we ask that you have a volunteer t-shirt, a vest, or a volunteer badge visible while you're working in the gardens. So it's a few things. It lets people know, like, yes, you should be crawling around in that garden bed and removing things. It also lets people know, hey, this person probably knows how to find the restroom. Maybe they can answer a question about a plant. I will say you are usually the face of Yew Dell. You're often the first people that visitors see. What we request is you don't make anything up. If they ask you a question about a plant and you can't find the answer, you can grab the staff that's working with you. And I always like to tag along so I can learn the answer as well. So um, those are things to keep in mind. And then signing in and out, I often get asked, well, why do I have to sign in and out? It doesn't matter. I don't care if you count my hours. Well, there's actually a lot of reasons why we have volunteers sign in and out, and this goes for pretty much any organization you volunteer with. One big thing with Yew Dell, especially given the nature of working in nature, is safety. It's knowing who is working on site should an emergency arise, and we're able to kind of do a head count and check in with everybody. It also it does help us with volunteer recognition. We have an annual volunteer celebration that we use that data for. And then the other thing is it does help the organization as a whole. There are many, many grants that you cannot apply for if you do not have accurate volunteer data. So it's kind of three different facets. There's probably a few more thrown in there. Maybe it'll help me find you on the ground so I can come and ask you a question even. And having this volunteer management system, Volunteer Matrix, has really helped us a lot with that because staff can even pull that up on their phone if they need to check and see who's on site. So thank you for helping us with that. Communication. So, how do you even find out what volunteer opportunities are coming up? So, the Volunteer Matrix is going to be the best hub to find all upcoming volunteer opportunities. We keep that very, very updated. We also have our monthly volunteer e-news that you were able to sign up for when you registered in Volunteer Matrix. And that's going to share the next 2 to 3 months worth of volunteer opportunities, as well as share our volunteer spotlight for the month, share some cool things going on the grounds, any big announcements. That's where you're going to find those. We also have the Yew Dell Volunteer Facebook group, which if there's anything in between volunteer e-newses, any recruitment efforts we'll put there. But we also use that just to brag on what our volunteers are doing, show off cool things that are growing in our houses and things like that. So if you're on Facebook, I definitely encourage you to join the Yew Dell Volunteer Facebook group. And then our website is the other place to go and check, especially the volunteer page, because that's going to have information that is updated regularly. Now, for cancellations, if you are canceling, there's not really any repercussions to that. You're not getting paid. This isn't a job. You're choosing to be here. All that we ask is that you let us know that you're not going to be coming. That way, our staff isn't sitting in the horticulture center waiting for you to arrive and you're sitting at home with a flat tire, not able to come in. And that goes for weather as well. I live about 45 minutes away from Yew Dell, and what it's doing at home versus what it's doing at Yew Dell can be two completely different things. So if you look outside and, yeah, I don't really want to get out in that today, just let us know. If it's too hot, it's too cold, it's too rainy, too sunny. I don't know. Just we request that you let us know and cancel through Volunteer Matrix. If it's less than an hour before your shift, the system won't let you cancel that way. So that's when you would need to email your contact. So whether that's one of the garden staff or the volunteer coordinator, just make sure that they know that you won't be making it in. If Yew Dell is canceling, doesn't happen very often. Usually it's because the weather is inclement or, something unforeseen happened like a burst pipe or something. We will cancel it in Volunteer Matrix, which will prompt an email. Um, if I don't feel like that's enough, we'll also give you a call, especially if it's getting really close to the start of your shift time. So just make sure you keep an eye on those things. If there's ever a question of, it's going to be 104 degrees today. I'm not sure if I should be volunteering. We usually try to make calls like that earlier, which kind of plays right into self-care while gardening. So a really big emphasis we have, and this is for staff and volunteers, is that the most important thing you can do is to take care of you. If you're not feeling well, please stay home. If you've been asked to do something you physically should not be doing, please tell us and do not do that. You know more about what's going on with your body than we do. So please make sure you're listening to it, you're advocating for yourself, you're taking breaks. We have these wonderful posters hanging up in the horticulture center that share some stretches you can do before and after gardening that kind of help limber you up. And then we'll go through a few slides of kind of to-dos and to-avoids here in just a second. One of the things that's really stuck with me is that the next position is the best position. So trying not to stay, I'm very guilty of like gardening like a goblin or a little gremlin all curled up. Try not to stay in one position too long and definitely don't garden like that. So one thing to keep in mind is your center of gravity. You want to try not to be stretching beyond, think of like your belly button as your core. Whenever you're having to stretch and balance in that way, like the woman on the left is doing, you're putting a lot of strain on your back. What you want to do whenever you're doing something like pruning, which you should only do if the garden staff has instructed you to do to begin with. But if you are, make sure that you bring whatever you're working on down in front of you rather than stretching and overextending yourself. Another thing is kneeling. Oh my goodness, there's a lot wrong with one of these photos. I'm going to let you think on that for a minute before I give it away. Um, Hopefully you figured it out. The picture on the left is much, much better for gardening longevity. So on the left, she is using a kneeling pad. We do have kneeling pads at Yew Dell for you to use, and please, please, please use them. Her back is straight and it hasn't caved in or curved over. You can see all the way from the top of her head down her back is a straight line. She also has herself propped up with her knee in front of her, so that goes back to that center of gravity idea again. That makes it much more stable. We have staff that started gardening this way, and they said the difference it made to how their back felt at the end of the day was incredible. So think about the position that you are using while working, and that position on the left also makes it easier to swap which leg goes up front, which is another thing that helps you with that next position is best position kind of thinking. Spinal torque, if you are ever shoveling or dealing with things on the end of a stick that are really heavy, there is a posture to avoid and a posture to keep. And that posture on the right is much, much better. So on the left, the gentleman is twisting his spine to move the soil that's on his shovel. And what that's doing is putting a lot of stress on your spine, which is not good. So if you are needing to transport something on the end of a shovel or pitchfork from one place to another, make sure you're keeping your spine straight and turn your whole body when you are moving those things. And then lifting. I'm sure you've all seen the OSHA posters at this point, but you should know on the right there that is a no-no. You never want to lift with your back. You want to keep your back straight and you want to lift with your legs. Something to keep in mind is that you always want to use the biggest muscle you can to do a task. So that even goes when you are using a soil knife or something small. Rather than using your wrist to do some fine motions, try to use the larger muscles in your arm to accomplish those goals. Okay, so I kind of mentioned this earlier. If you're not feeling well, please do stay home. Again, you are so much more important than the garden. We'll still be here whenever you get feeling better. If there's an emergency during a shift, there are first aid kits in every single building. You can have staff point that out in the horticulture center whenever you arrive. It's like a green tote that has your basic first aid supplies in it. If it's something beyond what a first aid kit would help, please alert a staff member as soon as possible and don't hesitate to call 911. We are very, very, very close geographically to the fire station, so they can get here very quickly. So call 911, alert a staff member, and that goes for if you're helping somebody else too, which you're not required to, but if it comes to that, just please feel empowered to do that. Um, and then whenever you sign up to become a volunteer, you do agree to the volunteer code of conduct. If you need that resent to you, please let us know. That's also in that email that'll be sent for every shift that you sign up for. The general gist of that is that whenever you come to the gardens, you're going to help maintain it as a place of peace for everybody. So if you have any questions about that, please let us know. So back to those regular volunteer opportunities, I wanted to share a little bit more information about those. So I mentioned earlier our weekly work days. Those are usually on Wednesdays and Thursdays, and they start at either 9 or 10, depending on the season. We start a little bit later when it's cold, just to try to let the sun heat us up a little bit more. We do request that you are there at the beginning of any shift that you sign up for. If you can't stay the whole time, that's totally fine. We understand doctor's appointments in life and just your body saying it's time to stop. So if 2 or 3 hours is too long, that's fine, but please, please, please be there at the beginning of the shift because that's when you're meeting your staff, getting your tools, figuring out where you're going. And if you show up late, they may have already left to the location and you maybe left not knowing where to go. And that goes for all of these shifts. I think I forgot the little asterisk on the day core work days. So the day core work days are usually Thursdays from 1 to 3, March through November. And the second Saturday of every month, we do have our Saturday work day as well, which again, orientation is not required for that. And registration for that and pretty much every shift in Volunteer Matrix does close 1 hour early. We ask that you sign up more than an hour before the shift, but that helps our team better prepare for the day and for what tasks that will be available. But that is the limitation set by the software. And then we also invite corporate and group volunteering April through November. We have lots of big projects that it's really fun to tackle with those larger groups. All right, so now I'm going to let you hear from somebody else's voice for a little bit here. This is Sadie Heckman, our garden and arboretum manager, and she's going to go over some of the most commonly used tools in the garden.
Hi Yew Dell volunteers. Today I'm here with you because we're going to talk about different tools that you'll be using when you volunteer in the gardens at Yew Dell. So right now I have our most commonly used tools out here on display. We're going to talk about each one and then I'm going to do a couple of demonstrations on how to properly use each tool. So the first thing that we have that is the most popular in the gardens is what we call a soil knife, also known as sod knives. There's a variety of different names, but this is one of our favorite gardening tools. This is best used for weeding. You can dig down really deep, and it even has, sometimes they have measurements on them, so you know how deep you're getting. And it's really good for popping weeds out of the ground and making sure to get all of the root systems so that the weeds don't come back and you have to pull them again. So this is one of our favorites. You'll use this a lot in the garden when you do volunteer. The next tool we have, the next three actually, are different types of pruning tools. These are used quite a bit in the gardens, but you just want to make sure that you're touching base with a Hort staff member before pruning anything in your designated garden or in the gardens in general. There's a lot of things that we don't prune in the gardens, and there's lots of reasons why. But when we are cutting back, there's 3 different tools that we might use. The first one is a hand pruner. These are one of my favorites. We have these in the Hort Center, and there's a couple of different things that are tricky if you've never used these before. Number one is it has a little lever here on the left, and that is used to open it. So if you squeeze the red handles and move the lever over, it allows the pruner to open, and then you can begin using it. I forgot to mention this a lot when volunteers come out, and it's a very important thing. And then when you're transporting it or carrying or moving to the next plant, make sure you lock it just so that it's a more safe thing to carry around. So also when you're pruning, these are for things that are less than your pinky diameter. And the reason that is when these are nice and sharp, you should very easily be able to cut something the size of your pinky, and it's going to come off really nicely. We have a variety of different sizes of loppers. This one is able to cut up to 2 inches in diameter. So it's very important that you pick the correct tool for the correct plant that you're pruning on. These are really good for dead tree limbs, really thick woody things, kind of like bush clover in the garden, or if you're cutting down tree suckers, these are really handy. And then when you're also using these 3 cutting tools, you want to make sure to keep them away from rocks, cattle fencing, different types of fencing, because it'll damage the blade, which requires us to purchase a new one if it's a big enough damage. I don't know the proper term, but I call it a head shear. So it's like a big pair of scissors that you can use in the gardens. It's a bypass system, so the 2 blades are sharpened on the inside and they cross over just like a pair of scissors. But these are really helpful when cutting really soft herbaceous things. So for example, toad lilies, grasses, asters, coreopsis, that kind of very fine herbaceous material. These are wonderful for using. These do not touch anything woody. You'll have to struggle a lot if you try to cut tree limbs with this or anything very, very dense. Next couple of tools are digging or helpful tools for weeding. So the first one we'll do is just a regular shovel. This one in particular has a really small head on the bottom of it. These are really good for planting annuals or something really small. Also bulbs if you wanted to do that. But with these, what I want to point out, most of our typical shovels either have a fiberglass handle or a wooden handle. So when you're using these and you shove it in the ground, you don't want to be prying on this. So like some people, if this was in the ground and you're like sitting going like this on it, that's going to put a lot of pressure on your handle, eventually breaking it. So we want to make sure we're not using this for prying, and this is simply for digging a nice hole. In a case that you need to pry, what you'll want to use is a spade. So this one here is a spade. It's much, much heavier. It's completely made out of, it's either steel, I think it's steel. So it's very, very durable. It's very heavy. So you don't have to use as much body weight with this one because it'll go into the ground really nicely. We sharpen the end of these, so they're really good for digging tree holes or anywhere where you're going to encounter a lot of roots. And you can pry with this one. So if you were to pry on this, you're not going to break the steel handle on it. So it's really great for those tricky areas where you need prying. This is called a stirrup hoe, and it's one of my favorite hoes to use in the gardens because it kind of tills as you use it, and I'll demonstrate this later. But with these, this is another thing that you don't want to press too hard on downwards. Like if you push here with my left hand too hard, you can snap the handle. So you want to be very gentle with it. But with these, they're also sharpened on this little stirrup area. So you should very easily be able to graze it across the ground, and it'll pull all the weeds up for you. So now we'll go into the gardens and I'll demonstrate how to use some of these tools. Alrighty, so the first thing that we're going to demonstrate in the gardens is the proper use of a hand pruner. So right now I'm surrounded in hydrangeas. These are something that we often cut back with either a lopper or a pruner. You can use both. But for the pruners, I wanted to show you how easily they should cut. And you should never be trying to cut something and you have to do this motion in order to get it to slice through whatever you're cutting. So with this, I'm going to cut back this hydrangea and just show you guys how it should function in the gardens. So it should be very easy to cut. No force is needed. It cuts very nicely. If you're using a tool in the garden and it's very difficult to use in the manner that it's supposed to be used in, put these in the broken tool area so I know that I need to address it. But that's what it should do. It should have nice clean cuts. You shouldn't have to pry, and it should make a nice little snap noise as you cut. And then, as I mentioned earlier, make sure you lock it before you transport it anywhere, and you're ready to prune. Alrighty, so the second pruning tool that I'm going to demonstrate is our 2-inch lopper. Like I mentioned earlier, we have different size loppers, so just make sure whatever you're cutting on is adequate for the tool that you chose. So right now we're going to cut back some bush clover or lespedeza. This is one of my favorites to cut back because it has a really satisfying noise, and the loppers work really well. You can also occasionally use pruners depending on the diameter of the branches, but we're going to do loppers today. So what you're going to do, just like the pruners, these should be sharp enough that you have to put very little effort, and you shouldn't have to like prop it up against your knee and push on it. I know I'm guilty of that. It should cut very easily and very nicely. And for anything that you are pruning in the gardens, it's very important to touch base with either myself, a horticultural apprentice, and make sure that what you're pruning is one, necessary and that it's something that we want to do, but also that you have the right tool to do it. The last thing to know about using the loppers is a lot of people, when they're digging a hole for a tree or doing new plantings, they like to shove these into the ground in order to cut roots. When you do that, you want to make sure you have the root fully exposed so you're not shoving this into unknown territory. You never know if there's going to be rocks or wire or some sort of weird thing in the soil that's going to damage our blade on our lopper. So when you are doing roots, make sure you have a nice clear visual of what you're cutting and that you're not shoving the head of the loppers into a soil with unknown materials in it. And also when you are digging holes for trees, it's better to use the spade that I showed you earlier with the heavy orange handle to cut the roots for you, because those are sharpened, so that's a lot better use of a tool rather than shoving loppers into the soil. The next pruning tool that we're going to use is the shears or head shears, whatever you want to call them, and I'm going to demonstrate it on Amsonia. It's an herbaceous perennial that has soft, fibrous stems, so it's very easy to cut with these. And like I mentioned earlier, these are best used on grasses, but I like to use them on Amsonia. So I'll show you how to cut this back. So with these, again, just like the pruners and loppers, you should never have to force it. It should cut really nicely. And this one has a really, really satisfying noise. So it takes very little effort. It makes a mess. And it does a nice, clean, quick cut. And then something else I want to mention with tools is when you're using them in the garden, make sure you're being aware of your surroundings, because you don't want to cut anybody else's hands if they're in the same area, or have anybody surprise you when you're using these tools, because they are very sharp. We sharpen them every year. Thank you to a volunteer. So these tools can be very dangerous if not used properly. Alright, the last tool that I want to demonstrate is a tool to make weeding a lot easier if you have a lot of weeds, like in the overlook garden, and you don't want to pull each and every single one. So with this stirrup hoe, it's not the best for weeds that have really big or deep root systems, or weeds that are relatively mature. So for example, this is some sort of winter annual weed that's in the overlook garden and has a very big root mass. So it is better to pull this by hand to get all of the roots. But if you have surface weeds that are very, very small, similar to like what's right here, this is perfect. So what you do is you have very little pressure when you're holding it, but you just go back and forth, just like this. So what it's doing is, you can see there, it pulled up the weed by its roots and tills it over. So then you can just leave it on the ground and it'll decompose like that. But yeah, and then your whole area is weeded. You didn't have to kneel down. Your feet didn't fall asleep while you were weeding. and you don't accidentally throw your soil knife in the weed bucket like I do often and then put it in the compost pile. So we do have a couple of these in the Hort Center. Feel free to use them. And I need to sharpen them so that they do a little bit better of a job. But yeah, this is something that I hope to see you guys use in the garden. Makes your life a lot easier. And I hope this video was helpful, especially for you new volunteers. If you have any questions, please let us know. But these are the most common tools that we use. And we just want to make sure that you have the right tools for the space that you're in to make it a lot easier, a lot more enjoyable, and overall a better experience. So thank you for watching this video, and thank you always for volunteering and being our biggest supporters.
Okay, so if we were doing, oh, and all of those tools are super, super helpful, especially that the garden hoe, the stirrup hoe, that has become one of the most popular tools in the garden. We've also gotten some more adaptable tools, so smaller shovels and lighter pruners that are easier for more people to use. So always looking to grow our tool collection and make things more accommodating for even more people. So, if this was in person, we would walk around the gardens and take a physical tour of the grounds, but unfortunately, we're having to do this virtually. So, we're going to watch this really beautiful video that was put together several years ago about the history of the grounds and kind of the vision. It's one of those videos that's going to give you goosebumps. So, I'm going to pop it to that video, and I'll see you in a minute.
Time is too long to those who mourn, too short to those who laugh. To those who love, time is eternity. Theodore Klein.
This property and Theodore Klein together are really a unique piece of horticultural and agricultural history. In the early stages of the nursery industry, you went out and you hired all the strong backs you could find in March or April. And very few people were out there with a lot of background in nursery production and landscape horticulture. And then around November, you'd lay everybody off. And then the next spring, you'd start all over again. Theodore was one of the people who saw the value of accumulated knowledge in an employee. And so he would bring people on in the spring to work in his nursery and his landscape business. But he oftentimes would keep them on through the winter, working on projects here on the farm and on the property. It was his way of retaining that accumulated knowledge so that in the spring you weren't starting from square one. While he was a wholesale producer and he grew 20,000 of this and 10,000 of that and 50,000 of another thing, a large chunk of the grounds he used as a place to test out other plants. And so he collected plants from wherever he could find them, and he brought them in and put them out on the grounds in gardens and used that as a way to evaluate whether they were worthwhile plants for this region. What I've heard from family is that for a 10 to 20 year period during its heyday of the farm, it's pretty much flour, sugar, and coffee were the main staples that they brought in. They had beef cattle, they had dairy cows, they had hogs and chickens, they had tree fruit orchards and grapevines and vegetable gardens and canning cellars. And there were not a whole lot of farms in this part of the world that were that self-sufficient through that full period of time. That was something that was more common much earlier. And so he combined a place to raise his family with a place to develop a commercial nursery of ornamental plants with a working production farm, all in one place.
His family had come over to work in the vineyards in the Cincinnati area. That was a big wine growing area. It is no longer. And he was self-taught. We have essentially his high school and college education in his old library of books that he collected. He taught himself to weld, and the chandeliers that are in the castle are ones that he forged himself. He traveled in Europe and brought back things that he thought would be castle scale, furniture and the andirons in the fireplace. He taught himself to carve, and so on the castle are several of his carvings. Above the castle door, the door to the castle, is a carving that Theodore Klein did that was a sundial. And above it is this part of this poem. Time is too long to those who mourn, too short to those who laugh, but to those who love, time is eternity.
As long as I can remember, I remember seeing this and thinking about it. It really makes you think, especially, me as a kid reading it for the first time with no sense of our value of time. It really puts things in perspective. But to those who love, time is eternity. Just thinking about how my grandparents, Theodore and Martha Lee, were crazy in love all their whole lives together. It's really sweet.
He always said he built this for her. So big and strong that he was, but she passed 2 years before he passed. It was really jolting to see him to come into the kitchen and be weeping openly. He missed her so much. He said, "I built it all for her." They were just such a two-headed monster. They were great. You could walk in any evening. Daytime, they're both going two different directions, but at mealtime they're there, and then late at night watching the news or some horrible nighttime miniseries. But they would be just talking, holding hands, and just sharing their day with each other.
I remember that there was always, in the kitchen, there was always a box on the wall that housed a radio. And this radio was the main communication between Martha Lee, who was stationed in the house, and then my grandfather, Theodore, who was out in the field digging trees. So the telephone would ring. There was one telephone, and that was for business and personal. So the telephone would ring, an order would come in, because this was a wholesale business. So an order would come in for the trees, and then my grandmother would take the order, and she would then use the radio to communicate with my grandfather, Theodore, to say, so-and-so business just called, they need however many trees dug, and they want it delivered by such and such. So that would be the order. Meanwhile, Martha Lee was in the kitchen cooking lunch, because every working day, well, actually 7 days a week, Martha Lee was making a hot lunch for her husband. And so then my grandfather would come in at lunchtime, have his hot meal, then go back out in the field and work with his crew to get things done. And also, as another part of her contribution to the business, she kept all the books. She did all the bookkeeping and accounting.
Oh, bless her heart, she had to do so much with us underfoot throughout the summertime. I keep looking up at the kitchen. Where is she? We could do no wrong, but we weren't too wild and crazy. But we must have worn her out. We grandkids were her little shadows. Papa would go off and do whatever he needed to do. But she was always there, just the ringmaster of the circus of grandkids, whoever dropped by, telephone, and what needed to be made in preparation for the next meal or the next day.
Martha Lee and Theodore's house was they always had an open door for everyone. At the end of the driveway, there was a gate, but it was never closed. They loved having visitors.
I had heard of Theodore Klein through the grapevine and arranged to meet him. He was 83 years old. It was right after his open heart surgery. And so we got to spend time with him the last 10 years of his life, and it changed our lives. He became our mentor.
We'd go out and we'd sit in Theodore's kitchen, and he would be talking and he'd be drinking coffee, and I would just be sitting, be fascinated by the man. His knowledge, his history, his hands-on experience, his ability to dig trees and plant trees, and his passion for the business, and his willingness to help us.
But the real fun was getting in the golf cart. And sometimes you had to duck because he wasn't real careful about the overhanging branches.
Yeah. A lot of nurseries back in the day didn't have unusual stuff. Theodore was kind of a pioneer in unusual stuff too.
I had not met him, but I heard that he had this wonderful collection of outstanding trees, and I had always wanted to see them. I started a nonprofit in Louisville by the name of Botanica, with the mission of having lectures, bringing in speakers from around the world to talk about horticulture, different aspects of horticulture. Somewhere along the line, we had a very big conference in the fall of '97. Theodore got a standing ovation when he walked in the door. People recognized him and what he had done for the nursery industry. I was really exhausted after putting this conference together, and I was laying in bed the next morning thinking I didn't have to get up or do anything. And I got a phone call, and it was from Jules Klein, his son, and he was calling saying that Papa really enjoyed coming to the conference the night before and also to the party afterwards. And that Papa would like for me to come out and meet him personally and to see Yew Dell and take a tour. And so I said, well, Jules, that sounds wonderful. Maybe in a week or two. And he said, well, actually, Papa wants you to come out now. So I got out of bed, I got dressed, and I headed out to Crestwood, and the entire family was sitting in the kitchen, and there was maybe 10 people sitting around the table waiting for me with their arms crossed, and Theodore was at the head. So it was a little intimidating. I thought, this is an opportunity. So many people wanted to see his place, and they never had seen it. It was a little bit bold of me, but I asked him, would it be okay if in the following spring we opened up his place, Yew Dell Gardens, for people, a select number of people of the industry to come in and look at his collection of trees. And he said, yes, that sounds great. So then the following May, that would be May of '98, we had an open house. Theodore sat in a chair right at the bottom of the steps below the house, and people came up and sat next to him for a few minutes, greeted him, told him how much they enjoyed seeing the Arboretum, and got to spend a little time with him. I'm really glad we did it. The following year he died, so this gave them an opportunity to really meet with him and to talk with him and to tell them how much they appreciated his work.
I was fortunate enough to move to Louisville a little while before Theodore passed away. I had met him on a previous visit or two to the Louisville area. Mutual friends in the plant business had brought me out and had a chance to meet and take the golf cart tour and enjoy the plants and the gardens on the property. I think I was in Louisville for about 1.5 years before Theodore passed away. And so during that time, I would come out and visit and learn from him and enjoy the property. He was still working in the gardens, I think right up until just a couple weeks before he passed away. In fact, we have photographs in our archives of Theodore on his hands and knees the spring of that year, planting out oak seedlings in a nursery, which to me is the ultimate of the gardener ethic, right? I mean, no one plants an oak tree planning to swing on the tire swing under the mature oak tree. But when you're 93 years old and you're still planting oak seedlings, I don't think you can say much more than that about someone's garden ethic and approach to things. So he was very active in the garden, as active as he could be. But obviously, at the age he was at the time, he was not able to keep up with everything in the gardens. And so while he still was out in the gardens just about every day doing something, his gardens were getting a little bit out of hand. After he passed away, of course, the property sat for a couple of years without daily attention. And as any gardener knows, it doesn't take more than about lunch hour for a garden to get out of control.
The Arboretum was a trampoline of vines that went from tree to tree. The greenhouses were completely broken, glass everywhere. They had young trees growing through the roofs. You really couldn't see the sunken garden. It was gone. It was full of weeds. The secret garden was impenetrable. Somewhere around 2000, there were a group of us, partly from my garden club, who decided that something had to be done to save Yew Dell.
The early years at Yew Dell were very interesting. The only work that happened on the grounds happened on second Saturday work days. Second Saturday of every month, from 9 a.m. till about 4 in the afternoon. We had volunteers, and sometimes we'd have 2 or 3, but a lot of times we'd have 20, 30, 40 volunteers, because a lot of people knew Theodore or knew of Theodore. A lot of people in the industry got their start working for Theodore or buying plants from him with his support. And so there was a lot of interest in helping. And so the diametrically opposed typical day at Yew Dell was, on a typical Tuesday, it would be me sitting in my office and the house would creak, and that was pretty much it. And then on a second Saturday I would come in and we'd have 3 arborist crews, the South Oldham High School football team, and 20 gardeners all looking for something to do in the garden. And so it was a little overwhelming.
We didn't open to the public until might have been 2006, because that's how much background work we had to do to get it to where people could actually come and visit. It has grown tremendously since then. We have a volunteer corps of 350. We have 1,500 members.
Both my grandparents would be thrilled beyond belief to see all the types of people that have come out. See, I'm used to family and my uncles and all the botanical Latin spoken around the kitchen table. That other people garden too. They come from all different places. Yeah, I talk about it. It's like yoga. It's like prayer time. It's very spiritual. It's just plain fun coming here to volunteer, because you learn when you work alongside other people.
My grandfather Theodore did it with his own 2 hands. It's gratifying to know that when you're here doing the work and helping as a volunteer or a participant, that you're really carrying on this tradition of Theodore Klein, getting his hands dirty, learning about things, the education, and executing the project.
The mission of Yew Dell has always been, I think, distilled down to one phrase, and that is raising the bar of horticulture. Horticulture is one of those things that just undeniably elevates quality of life. I mean, there's no one who can walk into a beautiful garden and not have that day enhanced. It's just part of our DNA. Whether you're walking through an arboretum planting of just big, noble, beautiful trees, whether you're in a wild garden with tropicals and contrasting colors and forms, whether you're walking through a greenhouse and just looking at cuttings rooting in a bench, sitting on your back your back patio with an iced tea or a lemonade and just watching hummingbirds, feast on the flowers that are in the garden. Some people look at horticulture, ornamental horticulture, as an amenity, but to me, without those kinds of things as part of your everyday life, life gets pretty boring and mundane. A place like Yew Dell can make horticulture more accessible to more people and help people be more successful in their efforts, whether they're ambitious or modest. I always say if your only goal horticulturally one fall weekend is to plant a tree in the front yard, even if the only reason you're doing it is because everyone else in the street is doing it, well, we want you to be as successful as possible, and we want you to get something rewarding out of that.
I'm hoping people will have pleasant experiences, and I know they can't all sit around the kitchen table with my grandparents. Bring their own is what I want. I want them to bring their parents, grandparents, and the multi-generations come and picnic here.
Welcome to Yew Dell. I hope you enjoy your visit today, whether you've been here 1 time or 100 times. Enjoy a stroll through the arboretum, walk through all the gardens, visit the greenhouse, take a hike on the trails, and when you go home, the best thing to do is plan your next visit.
You just sat through a whole bunch of information. We thank you very, very, very much for joining us for this. We regret that this can't be in person. If you're watching this, it's likely because I am out because I just had a baby. Um, so following watching this video, you'll be prompted to answer some questions that we addressed during this orientation. Once you have answered those questions correctly, you will receive the qualification and volunteer matrix saying that you have attended orientation, and that will open up those opportunities that we mentioned before, things like the weekly work days, event opportunities, the decor work days for you to be able to sign up for. As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us, and welcome to our community. We are so excited to grow with you. Thank you.